Our story today starts in Tokyo, which is why we have this playing on the ground. And I want to start off this talk by giving you a true story and a true example. I think you can all hear me, can you?
Yep.
Okay. So, one of the members on our advisory board, he was CEO in the US, and then he was moved to Japan. And what the board said is, we want you to go to Japan and we want you to start up a trading organization, a trading part of the business. And we think it's going to be about 500 people strong. And Robert is obviously a veteran of this industry, and he said, and he knew how the industry worked. And let me give you just a background. I'm sure you'll realize that the bank industry is very, very innovative. They're very innovative at coming up with new ideas that no one understands unless you're actually in the industry. And we know where that got us in 2008. So, but it works like this: is in this business, in this trading business, you innovate new products. And there's a very high margin when you go to the market because no one else is doing them. And you've got a lifespan of about 2 months. Because within that 2 months, everyone else starts copying your product and the margins decrease very rapidly, and then you've got to come up with a new product. So Robert was asked to present to the board, what are you going to do? What is your strategy? So on the appointed day, he walked into the boardroom and he said, he had one sheet of paper. Who of us has ever walked in with one sheet of paper? And he said to them, he said, look, I know you're expecting 500 people, I want 50 people. I only want 50 people, but let me tell you, I want the best of those 50 people. Those people, we're going to spend some money on recruiting those people. We're going to make sure that they are the creme de la creme for the role that they have to do. And we're going to spend time developing in them. And we're going to spend time making sure that they've got the right organizational structure. And we're going to make sure that we really get the teams working well together. Now, you can imagine the board's reaction. They were feeling a little bit uncomfortable. You're feeling a bit uncomfortable if you're in this situation. They said to him, well, what products are you going to devise? Who are you going to sell these products to? And he said, I don't know. He said, I have no idea what products this team is going to come up with. I have no idea which segment that's going to appeal to. But what I do know is that with this group of people, we're going to continuously innovate. We're going to have the highest margins in the business, and we're going to meet the very aggressive targets that you have set. Now let's just think a little bit about why the people in that room might be feeling a little bit uncomfortable. So how do we traditionally go about strategy and setting strategy in a business? We think about what's going to happen in the next 5 years. We try to predict the future. And then we come up with a mission around that, some objectives, a strategy about how we're going to grasp that future and where we're all going to go. And then what do we put in place? We say, what are the budgets for the next 5 years? And we're going to revise those on an annual basis, etc., etc. But we're going to work out how we're going to monitor our performance against that budget. And then we're going to say, on a quarterly basis or a half-yearly basis, we're going to say, well, how are we going against the business plan? How are we going against the strategy? Have we all done all those things we said we were going to do? And everyone feels very comfortable because they can say, well, we're on target, we've done the things that we're going to do, or we haven't. But the problem is, inevitably, and often what happens is somebody pulls the chair from underneath us. So think about a hotel that's going through a strategy a number of years ago and said, right, our focus for the next 5 years is going to be to focus on the agents and the business. We're going to make sure that their life is easy as possible. We're going to make sure they get the best margins, but we want them to send people to us. And you're halfway through that strategy, and suddenly you get price comparison on the internet. Suddenly you get someone like TripAdvisor that comes along, and not only are prices completely available, but even people's comments. So it all becomes very visible. And suddenly your priorities as a business change very quickly. How do the people feel in your organization? They feel, well, we seem to be changing all the time. We said we're going down this path, now we're changing to go down this path. Think about if there's a typhoon in Oklahoma and you've got a hotel there, you've set the next 5 years, suddenly no one wants to go there. It looks like a dangerous situation. How do you respond to that type of situation? And the fact is that the world is becoming a lot more unpredictable. I'm sure many of you feel it, that there's lots of things going on in the world that we can't control, and it seems to be getting more out of control. And it is. It is becoming more unpredictable. We come from a tradition, and particularly from a Western point of view, of working in a very linear world. We do this, this happens, then this happens, then this happens. But the world is becoming much more of a network than any kind of linear situation. We're getting more and more nodes happening. And with things like the internet and globalization, etc., we're getting a lot more connectivity between the different nodes within those networks. And you can look at any science that you want to look at. You can look at mathematics, you can look at biology, you can look at physics, and they'll all tell you the same thing. The more connectivity you get between a network and between the nodes, the more unstable the system becomes. So it's a proven fact that's going to happen, and I'll give you a few examples. Let's talk about geography. I'm sure a number of years ago, if you were running a hotel in the US and something happened in China, like an earthquake or something, it would have no impact on your business whatsoever. Suddenly, if there's an earthquake in Shanghai, your business in the US might be significantly impacted because a lot of your visitors are from there. And to be honest, there's going to be more and more Shanghais coming up. There's going to be bigger and bigger networks. Let's talk about supply chain. It was very simple to offer your guests communication in the past. You would contract a hotel supplier of telecommunications services. They would contract something like a Singtel. It was all very straightforward, a nice linear relationship. What's happened now is you've got mobile phones. Suddenly that revenue stream for you is completely dried up because now you've got much more interconnectivity. Now the telco is talking directly to your end customer. Who owns the customer now? We can talk about capital. I'm sure at one time in the hotel industry it was very clear who were the big chains, where were the sources of big capital going to come from. If you just followed those, you knew exactly what was going to happen in the industry. Suddenly you've got very wealthy sources of capital in China and India and other parts of the world who can suddenly just throw a lot of money into developing a new organization. Or you've got other businesses, it could be airlines, whatever, saying, well, we own this customer, actually we're going to go into the hotel industry, we're going to go into the tourism industry. So there's a lot of change going on. The other one I wanted to talk about is even ideas. And I'm going to take an example from the DVD industry. DVDs, the players, used to be manufactured exclusively in the US. And if you're a manufacturer of DVDs, the DVD player in the US, you look at your market, you know how fast it's growing, 5-10% a year, you build in some more factors from China's coming up or India's coming up, but you've got all your forecasts and you buy in equipment, you get the people, you're all ready for the future. What you haven't seen is that there's somebody in India who's come up with a new technology for making players that costs 1/10 of the price or even less than that. And suddenly, out of nowhere, because you haven't even seen it, all those forecasts are completely meaningless because your market is dried up and somebody else in a completely different way has come up. So how do you deal with it? How do you manage that? And what's interesting is that maybe this phenomenon is not new, or we know companies have to deal with change. And if you look at from 1917 to 1987 and you looked at the Forbes 100 list, actually 61 companies don't even exist anymore. 21 companies have dropped out of the top 100. There's 18 still around, including Citi, P&G and Exxon, but only GE actually outperformed the stock market. So this has been going on, but what's changed is the speed at which change is going on. And we've seen all of that now with the Googles and the Apples, etc., suddenly accelerating into the top 100 companies. And we looked at there, that's 1917 to 1987. That same picture will probably play out in the future in a 10-year space. So absolutely change is going on. So how do we do things differently? What's the alternative? If this is the traditional model, how do we need to look at things in a different way to manage the future? Well, what if we had an umbrella strategic intent? This is generally the direction we want to go in, but we're not absolutely sure how we're going to get there. But what we do know is that there's opportunities coming up the whole time. So what do we need to do as a business? We need to make sure we understand what are the barriers and challenges for an operation to take in new opportunities and make the most of them and to communicate between them? How do we make sure that we have resources and capabilities that we can move as an organization to the opportunities that we need to make the most of? How do we make sure that we take out the layer and we make this communication between opportunities and our strategy as effective as possible and deal with that change? And I'm going to take a slide here from Boston Consulting Group, which is their view of adaptive strategy. And there's some interesting areas here. It's about being ready, anticipating, having a view to the future and what's happening in the environment on a daily basis. Sensing, looking at scenarios, external work networks, being open to what is happening in the world. How do we make sure an organization is open to and gets a feeling for what's happening? Responsiveness, agility. How do we make sure that there's short cycle times? Modularity, decentralization. How many of us, when we're going to launch a new plan, we spend a year planning it? And it might be a small thing that's going on in your organization. We spend a year. By the time we get to the end of that year, the whole market's completely changed. And we spend a year trying to get there, and now we have to do it again. And actually, probably nothing will launch at the end of the year. So maybe our plans could be a little bit rougher. Let's do a bit of experimenting. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. Resilience, robustness. You know, if we're going to go through change, we better make sure we've got the resilience to actually get there. And because there is going to be ups and downs, but what we want to do is make sure we're sustainable. And can we continue to evolve? Can we continue to experiment and learn? And as we go through as an organization, as people in the organization, as people leading the organization. And I think what you'll agree is there's a huge amount here, and we've got a very short time to look at that. So there's just 3 areas that I'd like to talk about. One is called climbing anthills. It's about identifying opportunities. Second one is about allocating resources and being agile. And the third one is about developing talent. So what's the analogy with anthills? And I'm not just talking about, I'm talking about any industry. What happens is companies often choose an anthill that they want to climb. And they say, that looks like the highest anthill over there. I'm going to go climb that anthill. And they set off on a path to dominate that anthill and get to the top of it and be the best in class. Now, with that single-minded focus, what happens is often organizations lose sight of the fact that the ants have moved off. The ants have stopped building that any higher. And actually, they've moved across to a new source of food, which is 100 meters away, and they're building an even higher anthill. Now, if we're not open to that and we're not making sure that we're somewhere near that new anthill, we're going to get left behind and another competitor is going to go up. And just because they're on an anthill that's going to climb even higher than ours, they're going to do better than us. So this is about experimenting, because we can't hope to be in every single anthill, and we can't hope to know which ones are going to succeed and which are not. We just don't know. Things like Google were an experiment, but some of them are just going to take off. So what we'd like to encourage is a culture of experimenting on different ideas, not throwing lots of money at it, but just let's see how it works. So within your groups, for example, if you were going to even trial a new menu or a new concept within properties that you own, you don't need to change everyone, have a 3-month launch to see if it's going to work. You can actually do a very small trial, see what the response is, does this look good, get some experience in it, and actually, at least if that's the direction that things move in, you've already got some experience in it. You know what works and what doesn't work. So experimentation to make sure that you're covering the bases. And some won't work, but that's okay because you haven't thrown a lot of money at it. Some will work and you're in the game. What about resource allocation? If we are doing some experiments and we want to see how that anthill grows and that anthill grows, what's going to happen when it takes off, when that anthill just suddenly starts growing and everyone's focused on that and it's growing rapidly? We need to be able to allocate resources very quickly in that direction. It could be people, it could be technology, it could be money. And I think the interesting thing is to look at the implications of what that means. Because I think from a traditional sense, what we're led to believe is, let's make our organization as efficient as possible. We want to get to the top of the anthill, and once we get there, we're going to make it as lean and mean and as efficient as possible. We're going to do the most and give the best product with the least people or the least capital employed. Because that's what our shareholders want. That's what they're looking for. But if you need to be in a situation where it's rapidly changing and you need to deploy assets and resources, maybe you need a bit of fat in the organization. Because otherwise, how are you going to quickly mobilize those resources if you have nothing to work on and you have no way of actually latching onto to the next opportunity? And the third area I want to talk about is developing talent. Now, we work with one of the local banks here, and their remit to us was, in terms of customer service, was we've put in all these systems, we spend a huge amount on IT, and we're probably about 70 to 80% of where we want to get to. But actually, if we want to get any further, there's no point in putting any more systems in. We need to develop people. We need to develop people who will use those systems, but at the same time, will give that experience to our customers that will move us up the next notch in customer service. And when we talk about developing talent, it's not a very isolated, let's do a bit of training here, let's do a bit of training there, let's do some mentoring here. We need to make developing talent one of the key threads of our strategy, and then we need to put the resources behind it. So it starts at, where are we trying to go as an organization? What is the ideal organization looks like that's going to allow us to get there? Within that organizational structure, what are the different roles? What ideally would we like in terms of competencies within each of those roles to make our organization the best? How are we going to attract and how are we going to make sure we hire people who actually have those competencies? They might not have them today, but what we want is people who have the innate ability to grow into those roles. What does the first 60 to 90 days look like of that person in the organization? Because that is going to set the tone for probably their whole working life with you. And we need to get value out of people as quickly as possible. How are we going to develop people within the organization? Because we're going to have people who start off in very technical roles, specialized functions, but we want them to become managers and leaders. But we put them in these leadership roles, but we don't give them the capability to actually take on those roles. And then we wonder why they fail. How are we going to reward people? Are we really rewarding the behaviors that we actually want in the organization? Succession plan. Yes, we need a succession plan so we're a robust organization. But you'll be amazed at how more motivated people are when they can actually physically plot a path and they can see a very clear path through the organization of how they're going to develop themselves within the organization. And I want to pick up on just one point out of what I've said, which is about recruitment. And this is an advert from one of your hotels looking for people. So my question to you is, what is most important to you in any industry, any organization that you are running? And this is a very typical situation. So is the most important thing to you that this person has had 1 year experience in a similar environment? Or is the most important thing for you that they're passionate, that they have an eye for detail, that they want to develop themselves, they have that innate ability, that innate drive? What is most important to you? Because none of that is written here. So does this describe the perfect person for your organization? And as a comparison, what I'd like to do is to take, I'm not sure if you've all heard of the Shackleton expedition. 1914, Ernest Shackleton set out to walk over the South Pole. Never been done before. Amundsen had got to the South Pole before, but no one had actually walked over the South Pole. And he took 27 people with him in 1914, and his ship got stuck in the ice. And they spent 15 months to get off there, and they had to endure the most incredibly harsh terrain and conditions. But all 27 of those people got off. But this was the advert that he put in when he was putting together the expedition, and he got 5,000 responses. Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition and turn to success. So nowhere did it say, look, we need somebody who's good with dogs, we need someone who's a meteorologist. It just talked about what was the environment that you could see yourself in, and what are you going to get out of it? What is the opportunity? 5,000 applications, of which he chose 27 people that worked so well together as a team, they survived 15 months in the harshest conditions we know. And so, in summary, sustainable competitive advantage really is a bit of a myth. And in fact, it becomes even more difficult as we know the environment is constantly changing around us. And so what this means is actually the organizations that will do best is often those who are able to deal with change and adapt to the environment. And they will probably do better than those organizations who can very effectively implement a specific business plan. And I hope what I've done is to give you some ideas about how we can, in some ways, challenge traditional ways of thinking and look at how we can do things differently. Because it is a very competitive world. So I'd like to say thank you. We haven't had much time. If anyone would like to discuss it any further, we'd be more than happy to have a conversation.